Chicago, February 14th, 1929. It is 10:30 a.m. It is 18 degrees outside, but inside the garage at 2122 North Clark Street, 7 men are standing against a cold, brick wall. They aren't scared. They think this is a routine police raid. They think they will pay a fine and be home for lunch. But the men standing behind them aren't cops, and they aren't carrying handcuffs. They are carrying 2 Thompson submachine guns and 2 sawed-off shotguns. In mere seconds, 70 bullets tear through flesh, bone, and organs. The 7 men don't just fall, they are erased. Faces are unrecognizable. Legs are severed at the knees. The brick wall behind them is painted with a mixture of brain matter and arterial spray. When the real police arrive, the garage is silent except for a low moan. Frank Gusenberg, one of the victims, is still alive. He has 14 bullets in his body. He is literally leaking to death on the concrete. A sergeant leans in close, his knees soaking in the blood. He asks, "Who shot you, Frank?" Gusenberg looks up with glassy eyes. Even with his life slipping away, he stays loyal to the code. "Nobody shot me," he whispers. 3 hours later, he was dead. The St. Valentine's Day massacre wasn't just a murder, it was a message, broadcast to the entire world. In red ink, it said, "There is a new emperor in Rome." But while the world watched the blood on the floor, nobody noticed the invisible killer. That was already inside the emperor's own body. A killer that doesn't use bullets. A killer that eats the mind, one neuron at a time. Alphonse Gabriel Capone, they called him Scarface, a nickname he hated. He preferred snorky, slang for a sharp dresser, and dress sharply. He did. While the rest of America was starving during the Great Depression, Capone was wearing $500 silk suits and flashing an 11.5-carat diamond ring. How? Because the U.S. government handed him the keys to the vault. When Prohibition banned alcohol in 1920, they didn't stop people from drinking. They just turned bartenders into criminals, and criminals into kings. Capone didn't just run a gang. He ran a Fortune 500 company, built on vice. By 1927, his organization was pulling in $105 million a year. That is roughly $1.8 billion today. He had 600 gangsters on his payroll. He owned the police. He owned the judges. He essentially owned the city of Chicago. He was a celebrity. He signed autographs at baseball games. He opened soup kitchens for the poor. The press loved him. "I am just a businessman," he told them with a smile. "I give the people what they want." But that smile was a mask. Beneath the silk suit lived a monster of pure, unfiltered violence. Capone didn't just kill his enemies, he liquidated them. The most terrifying story isn't a shootout, it is a dinner party. When Capone suspected 3 of his top lieutenants, Anselmi, Scalise, and Giunta, of betrayal, he didn't scream. He invited them to a banquet. The food was gourmet, the wine was vintage. Capone toasted to their health. The men relaxed, they ate, they laughed. Then Capone gave a signal. His bodyguards tied the men to their chairs. Capone stood up. Slowly, from under the table, he produced a baseball bat. He didn't speak, he just swung. He beat them methodically, breaking shoulders, shattering ribs, crushing skulls. He swung the bat until the men were no longer men, but piles of broken meat. Then he sat back down, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and lit a cigar. This was the duality of Al Capone, a man who could cry at the opera on Friday and beat a man's brains out on Saturday. He was untouchable, he was the king, but every king has a weakness, and Capone's weakness wasn't the police. It wasn't a rival gang, it was a microscopic bacteria he had picked up in a cheap brothel years ago. Capone spent millions on bodyguards. He had armored cars and bulletproof windows. He was prepared for a war on the streets, but he was completely defenseless against the war inside his own skull. While he was celebrating his power, the syphilis bacteria in his blood had breached the blood-brain barrier. It was now neuro syphilis. It was quietly, slowly, turning his brain into Swiss cheese. The feds were closing in on his taxes. Yes, but nature was closing in on his sanity. The fall wasn't going to be tragic, it was going to be pathetic. They couldn't catch him for murder, so they caught him for math. In 1931, the IRS and a relentless agent named Frank Wilson nailed Capone for tax evasion. Capone laughed it off. He bribed the jury. It was a done deal. But on the day of the trial, the judge pulled a move that erased Capone's smirk forever. "Bailiff," the judge said, "swap the entire jury panel with the one in the next courtroom." Capone looked around, panic rising in his chest. His money was suddenly useless. The verdict, guilty, 11 years. He was sent to Alcatraz, the Rock, and there, the big shot vanished. Inmate number 85 wasn't a boss, he was a victim. Other prisoners sensed his weakness. They bullied him. He was stabbed with shears in the prison barbershop. He was humiliated. But the real horror was biological. By 1938, the syphilis was ravaging his frontal lobe, the part of the brain that controls personality and reason. Capone began to unravel. He stopped making sense. He would sit in his cell, having animated conversations with people who had been dead for 10 years. He forgot how to dress himself. The guards would find the most feared man in America cowering in the corner of his cell, sobbing like a toddler, because he was afraid of the dark. The government realized he was no longer a criminal mastermind. He was a mental patient. In 1939, they released him. He retired to his mansion in Florida, but the lights were on, and nobody was home. His final years were a grotesque parody of his former life. His wife, me, hid him from the public. Capone would put on his pajamas, take a fishing pole, and stand by his swimming pool for hours. He would cast his line into the chlorinated water, convinced he was catching sharks. He would rant about the business to his grandnieces, drooling as he spoke. The brain of the man who organized the St. Valentine's Day Massacre had deteriorated to the mental age of a 12-year-old child. His body was still alive, but Al Capone was gone. On January 25, 1947, his heart finally stopped beating. He died not in a hail of gunfire, but in a bed, confused, sick, and essentially lobotomized by his own vices. Al Capone is the ultimate American cautionary tale. He showed us the raw, ugly power of unbridled capitalism. He proved that if you kill enough people, they stop calling you a murderer and start calling you a boss. But look at the cost. He earned over $100 million. He built an empire of blood, and in the end, it bought him nothing. It couldn't bribe the bacteria eating his mind. It couldn't negotiate with death. Capone's life asks us a simple, brutal question: what is the point of owning the world If you lose your own mind in the process, he lived like a lion, but he died like a lamb. The era of the celebrity gangster died with him. The underworld realized that being famous was dangerous. They needed to go underground. They needed to get organized. They needed a board of directors. They needed Lucky Luciano. But that is a story for another file. This is Casualties. Don't let the glamour fool you. The only thing waiting at the end of the road is the rot.